We do have some business to conduct. Shelley's not here, so we're hoping that you could join us on the phone for a temporary quorum. Well, I don't know. I mean, we can certainly visit that at a different point, but just for tonight, to conduct the business that we need to. I guess we would be doing it now. How much time do you have? Sure. When are you available? Okay. Yep. Okay. Okay, he's not available for about another 15 minutes.
That's okay.
So we're just gonna roll with it tonight.
Let me do my parliamentary thing. Since he's not here, you still gotta open the meeting and do all that, and then we can arrange the business such that probably. Did he say he was going to be available after a certain time, or do we have just like a window?
It sounds like it's going to be after a certain time.
So let's go ahead and have the presentation, and then we can bring him on board and get the business conducted.
Perfect. Okay. Shall we go through? We can't even really do adoption of agenda or meeting minutes approval until he's on. Okay.
Beg pardon?
Flag salute?
We do the flag salute and introduce everybody and all that kind of stuff.
Great. All right, please join me in the flag salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay.
I have no idea.
So with that, I suppose we're moving forward to some presentations.
Our normal order of business is we do the flag salute, we do the housekeeping. We can't do housekeeping because we don't have a quorum here. Let's go ahead and we'll just do all the other business after Mr. Brewster and Ms. Whitney do their presentation. And you're all set.
Okay, great. Well, this will be fun. This is a nice intimate setting. Let's keep it interactive. I'm Paul Brewster. I'm a senior planner with Thurston Regional Planning Council, and my colleague.
I'm Whitney Holm with SCJ Alliance.
And tonight we're going to give you a briefing, kind of really the findings, a high-level summary of the Yelm Tenino Trail Extension Feasibility Study. We'll talk about some basics of the planning process, source of funding, talk about the planning process itself, who was involved. We'll talk about criteria that was used to rate routes, and then we're going to kind of go through some of the preferred alignments and then talk about cost estimates and next steps. And Dan will also chime in and sort of advising the Planning Commission on next steps. So Whitney and I are gonna tag team this. I apologize to Whitney, I do most of the talking on this presentation, but I want to acknowledge that PRPC and SCJ, this was a partnership, but Whitney here did the majority of the heavy lifting on this study. She did most of the work, and I'm kind of steal a lot of her thunder with this presentation. So Whitney's the wizard behind the curtains, and I'm just up front here. So a couple years ago, Tenino and Bucota approached my agency, Thurston Regional Planning Council. We're a federally appointed metropolitan planning organization, and as such, our agency receives federal transportation grant funding that our council has a discretion to award to priority projects in the region. So we issue a call for projects, and Tenino and Bucota submitted a joint proposal to do a trail feasibility study to build off the Yelm Tenino Trail to extend it south and west to Tenino. And in Tenino, it's been in the city's comprehensive plan for some time to extend the trail out west to Tenino city limits up near the Alpaca farm and down south to Bucota. But the alignments and the exact route that those trails would take and what all the sort of the challenges and the opportunities would be has never really fully been evaluated and studied, and so that's what we set out to do. So Tenino was interested in extending the trail out west as development occurs to provide access and mobility for future Tenino residents and future development as it occurs out there. And for Bucota, kind of a little different story. If you really wanted to travel between Tenino and Bucota from either direction as a bicyclist or a pedestrian, you're really relegated to walking on the shoulder of State Route 507, I think, which we can all agree that that would be a really unpleasant and an unsafe experience. At least it would feel very unsafe. So with that, we really wanted to look at options. And Bucota, as you can see from this view, we're kind of looking south at Bucota. There's really only one street, and that's 6th Avenue off of State Route 507 that goes into Bucota and it crosses the railroad tracks. And then to get out of town, the only other option is south on Tono Road, which, as you can see at the top of this photograph, is bordered by the Skookumchuck River. So that is subject to periodic flooding. And something I learned recently, in 1939, there was a train collision that hit a logging truck in Bucota and 6 people died. That's that little photo up in the upper corner. And that's been a concern of many Bucota residents with that mainline railroad going through there. I think it's up to around 40 trips a day that are passing through Bucota. Creates kind of a really unsafe situation. So Bucota was looking at this potential trail alignment as an alternative emergency access egress route to the town in the event that both of those roads would be closed off, that there could either be evacuation through this corridor or emergency aid vehicles being able to get in and out. And so TRPC led this study on behalf of Tenino and Bucota because it was federal funding, and there's just kind of some strings attached with using federal funding, so we agreed to lead the effort on behalf of the two communities, and TRPC contracted with SCJ Alliance to do all the technical work and much of the feasibility analysis, and TRPC's role was to kind of act as a convener and bring stakeholders together. So it was around a $65,000 federal transportation alternatives program grant. And from Bucota, Mayor Carr Whitney went down and interviewed the mayor. We had a couple of meetings. Whitney's going to talk about those, but I just want to mention the stakeholders from Tenino was Mayor Fournier, John here in our audience, and former Tenino planner Katrina Van Every. From Thurston County, we had both the roads, like public works perspective, to look at like trail crossings at roads, and we had Carrie Hibden, who's Thurston County's Parks Maintenance and Operations Manager. And from Washington Department of Transportation, Olympic Region, we had both Teresa Turpin, who's their multimodal transportation planner, and TJ Nedrow, and me from TRPC. So study objectives, we really wanted to look at, map and evaluate what potential routes would be, consider what the trail design would be in terms of, you know, how wide of a trail, what the setback should be from the road for buffer distance, considering what types of crossings we would have at intersections, think about, you know, is there any water resources or wetlands or floodplains or species habitat that we'd want to be concerned about, look at planning level cost estimates, and of course this was only a $65,000 study, so we do have some follow-up recommendations in there that would be required for additional work. And then ultimately we identify some funding strategies or funding sources that Tenino and Bucota could pursue. So I just want to point out, for much of the conversation tonight, to be thinking about your point of view is from the Tenino Depot Museum. That's our starting point, from the trail where the pavement ends, so much of the conversation will ensue from there. So the study was twofold. It was to look at an alignment south from Tenino City Park to Bucota and west out to Tenino city limits on Old 99. And now Whitney's going to take over on the next couple slides here to talk more about the process and the criteria.
So like Paul said, we got a group of stakeholders because we really wanted to get everyone's opinion from Bucota, WashDOT, Tenino, and just see what was really important for them. So we started off with workshop 1, and that was really some preliminary alignments on what they thought would be a good alignment and what we proposed. And also in that workshop, we talked about what was really important. How are we going to rate these alignments? How are we going to make that recommendation? So after that workshop, I had everyone go back and we created the criteria, and then they compared it to see what was important to them. And after we got the results of the criteria, which I'll go in further in this later, we rated all of the alignments and figure out which one was rated, had the highest value and the highest performance for each of the alignments, so we could come with a recommendation with backing of how we got that recommendation. So workshop 2 is really presenting the results and making sure that all the stakeholders were in agreement that they really did like the recommendation and how we got there. And then we created a feasibility study and a feasibility report, and we sent it out to all the stakeholders, and we got feedback from what they thought we should include and what we shouldn't include, and that's where we're at right now. So I am currently finalizing that feasibility report, and we have heard back from all the stakeholders. So hopefully relatively soon we'll have a finalized feasibility report. For the evaluation criteria, what we found most important to rate each of these alignments was perceived safety, and that includes how does that person feel when you're on that trail? Would you bring your family on that trail? Trail ambiance, are you just getting from point A to point B, or are you actually enjoying where you are? Are you out in the outdoors? Are there trees around you, or is there a loud train right next to you? Water resource conflicts, how can we minimize the impact we have on the environment, specifically to wetlands and floodplains? And that's really important from the Tenino Bucota stretch, because there are quite a bit of 100-year and 500-year floodplains on that stretch. Directness of route, are we just getting from A to B as quickly as possible, or are we kind of making people meander? And closure due to flooding, this also relates to the Tenino Bucota. How important is it that the trail is open year-round? Is it okay if it's flooded, if there's a 100-year or 500-year flood, that the trail will be closed? Or do we need to elevate the trail the entire way for there to be emergency vehicles?
So typically with these types of trails that we're looking at is we're here historically in Thurston County, they've been along abandoned railroad corridors. And you have that here coming into Tenino, going through the Yelm Tenino Trail, but I just want to point out this study was really unique because going south to Bucota and west to Tenino, we really don't have those options. So we were looking at on-street facilities or existing road corridors for the study, and so that's where that criteria was really important in weighing in and evaluating these routes. But we're gonna start off with focusing on that south segment to Bucota. This project is largely in Thurston County's right-of-way. It would, and I'll talk about the alignment in a minute, but some of the known issues that SCJ looked into, and it's sort of well documented in the appendices. There's quite a bit of substance in the final report in the appendices. A lot of the technical information is right there, whereas the bulk of the report itself is really kind of like a more detailed executive summary, which is really what we're presenting to you tonight. So yeah, State Route 507, it's a highway, lots of traffic, not a safe place to be, a lot of debris in the road. We know that's one of the conditions. Both on Crowder Road and State Route 507, you have drainage ditches on the road. That's not something you wanna contend with riding your bike along with the risk of traffic going by. Also just having existing right-of-way for a trail. The BNSF Railway Mainline Railroad, like I said, 42 trains a day. On that east side of the railroad, on that side opposite State Route 507, you have some steep slopes in there. You have wetlands due to the whole Skookumchuck River complex, 100-year FEMA floodplains, several creeks and culverts, and private property. Fortunately though, there's just one private property owner out along this whole stretch where we would either need, the city would need, or I should say the county would need to negotiate an easement or acquire that right of way for future trail development. And then again, as I mentioned earlier, Bucota is subject to some temporary road closures from either flooding or potential train incidents. We know there's Mazama pocket gopher habitat out there. So from light to dark, dark meaning a greater likelihood of gopher preference for those soil types down to light, which is less likely, but still we know that there's Mazama pocket gopher soils out in this area. Lots of wetlands because of the Skookumchuck River complex and just drainage areas. And of course, FEMA 100-year floodplain. So I just want to point out that to you because those do drive up the costs. They do will require some design considerations to minimizing those impacts on water resource conflicts. So the trails are labeled GR, that's for geographical reach, and so we're gonna kind of be going through some numbers. It's not too important for you to remember those. We'll just try to walk you through those. So here we are, we're looking south. GR1, I don't know how well that shows up. Yeah, you can kind of see it. It's that yellow line south to Bucota. This would be from the Tenino Depot Museum. It would continue south out of town on the existing railroad corridor to Crowder Road. And then at Crowder Road, just on the south end of city limits there, the trail would likely cross over to Crowder Road to be on the south bound lane direction of the road, so between the road and the railroad tracks. And I'll show you a design of what that would look like. That would go all the way down south to 184th Avenue southeast. That's the first road crossing there. That's a 50-mile-an-hour road on Crowder, so we want some kind of buffer. But yeah, 2.5-mile stretch, pretty significant. So you, as a trail user, you're going to be right between the road and the railroad, but with plenty of buffer in between. And then from there, there's two options. The first option I describe is geographical reach 2A. This is from 184th Avenue southeast to Bucota. It would emerge sort of right out on the north end of Bucota, right near their Public Works Maintenance Center. That's a stretch of 1.1 miles. We know that through there, as I showed you in the previous slides, we have wetlands in there. We know we have one drainage and one stream that's likely fish bearing that we would need two structures for, two bridges. So that would increase the cost in addition to the need for an easement or right of way through that property that's owned by the Jensen family. Winnie's going to talk a little bit more about how this one scored, so I don't want to steal her thunder on that one. But the total cost for this whole stretch south to Bucota would be $4.2 million. So that just that stretch along Crowder Road is like $1,950,000, and so a little over $2 million more to do that remaining stretch along the east side of the railroad tracks. So then we also looked at, okay, what would it take to develop this trail in a manner that it could support emergency aid vehicles? Well, let me back up. This trail going east along the railroad track south of 184th would be constructed at grade. So what that means is when it floods, it's going to be covered with water. So the trail is open space. That would be typical, but the reason for that is Thurston County prohibits clearing and grading in their floodplain. So we really can't just go out there and build a road and elevate it. If we were to do that, we would have to build it on pins. And so that was the alternative for the emergency route, is to say, okay, we need to build this up on pins, and it needs to support the weight of basically like a Medic 1A vehicle to be able to get in and out. That drives up the costs total for that corridor to $29.4 million. So when you look at those two costs, it's pretty easy to see which one is most feasible between those two. It really kind of kills that emergency aid route, at least within this stretch. Bucota's also looking at trying to negotiate with BNSF to put an emergency road within the railroad right-of-way, so it'll be higher up out of the floodplains and the wetlands. But I don't know really if they're gaining much traction with the railroad company to do that, and that would be a gated road that would only be open during emergencies, and it would not be open to the public for trail use. All right, this is what that would look like, at least along Crowder Road. So 5-foot vegetated buffer and a 10-foot trail. You can see it's squeezed in there between the road and the railroad. What you don't see in this picture is there are some utility poles out there along portions of this corridor that might be away, so there might be a need to relocate some of those utility poles, but some of those details would get sorted out in the preliminary engineering phase once this project would receive funding and move forward. So that's just a visual to give you a sense of what it could look like. I think it looks pretty nice. Okay, so the next stretch, when you would arrive at 184th Avenue Southeast, you would turn right onto 184th Avenue and then head south along State Route 507. That cost, and so yeah, so not quite the direct route, wouldn't have the same ambience, but the benefits of this route is that it's not going to close due to flooding. From a, I would say, a the Tenino Fire Department and Thurston County Sheriff's Office perspective, this would probably be a nicer route because they have that natural surveillance. They can tell what's going on, and they could really quickly gain access if there was an incident or an accident at the trail to help people out. So that's one of the pros. And lower cost, only $3.1 million versus the $4.2 million for the previous alternative I showed you. And that's what it would look like. It would be separated with a 2-foot wide Jersey barrier. Have you been down like I-5, you're driving through Centralia, you see Airport Road there on the right side as you're heading south. There's actually a very similar type configuration where there's a Jersey barrier right along the edge of Airport Road and a little paved shared use path. So if you want to just kind of get a feel for what that would look like, that's probably the closest thing in the area that this would kind of replicate. But if you've ever traveled by bike along the highway, it's all that road noise and those speeding vehicles going by you is kind of still the same. You're still going to have that, oh, I'm riding my bike next to a freeway, and yes, I have this Jersey barrier next to me, but it still might really feel unsafe and intimidating for some people. Okay, on to the West Tenino extension. To get out to West Tenino, really Old Highway 99 is really the only logical option that has high-speed traffic on it. You have the railroad trestle just there at State Route, the intersection of 507 and Old 99. You have Scatter Creek Bridge, and you have Mazama Pocket, Gopher Soils, and Habitat. But plenty of opportunities. That's a largely undeveloped portion of Tenino, and so as development occurs, you could use impact fees to help do that development, but there's still some questions about what side should it be, on the north side or the south side of Old 99. We didn't dig too deep. We can explain what some of the pros and cons of that are, but I think those details would get sorted out as you would go into the design phase and do some public engagement on that. So we looked at several options for how to get the trail to Old 99, as you can see, and I just want to kind of point them out here. So the magenta and the orange are basically the same alignment. It's proceeding south along the Depot Museum and then heading west on 6th Avenue. The difference here is one's on the north side of 6th Avenue and the other's on the south side of 6th Avenue. GR3A in yellow, that trail continues west on 5th Avenue and then takes that little curve south on Wickman and then gets back onto 6th. And that was put out there as a potentially more quiet street because some of the anecdotal information is that people coming north on 507 who want to avoid driving through the traffic on Sussex sometimes want to cut over to Park Avenue to get through town, and that stretch of 5th Avenue and Wickman there might be a quieter on-street alternative. The final through town option was also to go on 5th Avenue and then north on McClellan and then west on Sussex and then back down south along the railroad to kind of avoid that whole part of town and avoid the having to go through and under that railroad trestle there at State Route 507. This one really didn't pencil out though, just because indirect route and increased cost because you would still now having to be paving a trail as you proceed south along the railroad there. So something to consider with the design, here we are, we're looking west on 6th Avenue, we're looking at that railroad trestle. It's kind of a short distance, so this is really something that the city's gonna have to work with a design engineer to figure out really what is the safest and most practical approach to get trail users east and west along this little section. Should they just stay on the south side of 6th Avenue? Or go north, cross north somewhere mid-block here, and then proceed west. So still some uncertainty there. Additional uncertainty is WashDOT is looking at potentially replacing the stop sign at the intersection of State Route 507 and Old 99 with a roundabout to improve traffic circulation and mobility right at that point and improve the safety of that intersection. That would be a ways off, but that would be something that the city would need to contend with during the design phase for this project as well. So let's just start talking about the preferred alignments now. So kind of the obvious one, what we call geographical reach, 4 parallels Old Highway 99 from the Scatter Creek Bridge to west city limits. That's a 1.6 mile stretch. So that's going out all the way, to the end of city limits as to accommodate people being able to get on the trail as development occurs in the future. But then you have the Scatter Creek Bridge. Have any of you, let me just say, I think for a lot of people who drive along the stretch here right past 507, you really wouldn't even know it's a bridge because it doesn't look like there's much of a structure there. But it is over Scatter Creek, and in transportation terms, we would say this bridge is functionally obsolete. It still does its job, it carries a load of cars, but it's not a multimodal bridge. It can't handle cars and bike and pedestrian traffic simultaneously. So I think the trail could still be developed with this bridge. But I just want to state up front the cost estimates we did for this particular West Tenino stretch doesn't include the cost of replacing that bridge because the bridge really would be a standalone project that Tenino will have to deal with at some point in the future. And when it does, new standards are going to dictate that you accommodate for bicyclists and pedestrians on that bridge.
Paul, are you taking
Yeah.
questions now? Or?
Let's keep it interactive.
All right. Did you guys model a pedestrian-only bridge?
Yeah, we do. We have that in our cost estimate.
So you looked at both replacement of the vehicle bridge, adding a pedestrian bike piece, and a just supplemental ped only?
I just think we did the ped only.
Just ped only. We didn't do replacing the road and.
In And just because the cost of a ped-only bridge was very expensive, and because the Scatter Creek Bridge right now is functionally obsolete, it just kind of made more sense that at some point in the future that bridge will need to be replaced. I don't know if any of you are familiar with Henderson Road in Tumwater as you go across the Deschutes Valley right there at Pioneer Park. There's a bridge there. It's a little wider than this one, but if you observe people who are biking on that bridge, they kind of just learn to take the lane, and the motorists tend to slow down because they recognize there's nowhere else for them to go. So I think a similar situation could play out here at this location with a low enough speed limit and warning signs that I wouldn't say that the existing Scatter Creek Bridge is a deal killer for proceeding with development. I think that trail could go in, and I think some interim measures or traffic calming and warning signs could be worked out so that that trail could still largely be functional for trail users. Okay, so our combined, this GR3, which would be from the Depot Museum, 6th Avenue, connecting up with Old 99, and that total would be 2.23 million. And so that includes the design, any environmental work, right-of-way acquisition, and construction. And that stretch along 6th Avenue, particularly on the south side of 6th Avenue, is relatively undeveloped. So you do have room if you did want to put a shared use path in there. But also at many times of the day, just based on my experience, I'm not backing this up with some actual traffic counts, but traffic's pretty quiet in there at many times of the day. So probably as interim, you could probably put some paint on the pavement and call it good, put some sharrows down, and just sort of have it be sort of like a bike lane through that stretch for the interim. And Whitney, maybe you can chime in here. The actual design for that, did this include a separate trail, or was it all just on-street facility through here?
GR3 was just all on street.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. Okay, so Whitney is now going to talk about the criteria and how we rank these trails, and talked about how we sort of arrived at what we think are the preferred alignments.
All right, so like I had mentioned before, the criteria, we had 5 criteria that we were going to be basing our decision off of, or the recommendation off of. And when we use a comparison called pairwise comparison, kind of go head on head. So perceived safety versus trail ambience, and go all the way through. Anyways, when you finish that off, you kind of figure out, okay, what's the most important criteria to the people? And the stakeholders, they were all slightly different, but for the majority, perceived safety was number 1, and then trail ambiance was close behind, and directness of route was halfway there. Anyways, so when we rated each of the geographical reaches and each of the alignments, we used this weighted criteria to find the performance of each of the alignments. So here is all of the geographical reaches and all of the alignments with the performance. And so the performance is just the criteria that we use. So this does not include any of the cost. So we forgot about cost, and we're just looking at how they performed on what was important to the stakeholders. So at the very bottom you see geographical reach 1. Well, there was no other alignments, so there was only 1. So for geographical reach 2A right above it, you have 2A, then right above that 2A EV, which is the emergency vehicle, and that's the one that pretty much the entire stretch between 184th to Bicota is on raised piles to be above the 100-year flood. And then you have the 3B, and so in this example, the geographical reach 2A EV had the highest score. So when you look at the performance, people liked to see the 2A EV. In the next couple of slides, you'll see with the cost, the value of that route really drastically dropped, and so we'll see what value is the highest. But for the geographical reach is 3, so the A, B, C, and D of geographical reach 3. 3C and 3B, which I don't know if you remember, it was all along 6th Avenue, and they pretty much the only difference was where they crossed Old Highway 99. They had the highest performance. And here's a little, just a breakdown of the cost for each of the geographical reaches and the alignments. Paul kind of touched it, so we'll just kind of skim over that one. So for the value of the alternatives, this is how we made our recommendation. So for the value, it was the performance divided by the index cost. And so for the Tenino to Bucota extension, you can see that the 2A is slightly higher than the 2B. So it was the highest value of alignment would be the alignment along the private road, so just east of the railroad tracks. And so that is how we made that recommendation. And for the West Tenino, the 3C and 3B also had the highest value. So we didn't just pick performance and we didn't just pick cost. We used value to make the recommendation. Was that relatively clear?
And the stakeholders that input you used, were those the people that you talked about earlier from each of the cities?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I should say, in the study, it breaks it down on how each of the stakeholders did rate all of them, and then see how we got to this. I don't want to say average, because we kind of did a little bit more than that, but at the stakeholder meeting number 2, we kind of went over how everyone scored it, and then what was looking like the pattern, and everyone was in agreement. Yeah.
So can you go back to the maps that show the preferred alignment? So we know
Yeah.
where it ended up?
Yeah. So this is for the West Tenino extension. So the orange is the GR3B, GR3C. And that's just gonna be a matter of where it's gonna cross, if it does cross. And then GR4 didn't have any other options. So that's the recommended alignment to West Tenino. And then here's the one from Tenino to Bucota, GRA. So that is the trail would be at grade from 184th all the way to Bucota. And so when it floods, we would have to close down the trail, you couldn't use it. But it is along the private property.
And so, I mean, I think one of the things to factor, at least for the flooding, is at present it's infrequent enough that that trail is open most of the time. And when it does flood, it tends to be in the winter, when you're also gonna have just lower rates of trail use in general. And maybe someone will wanna park their kayak or canoe out there and paddle that stretch instead. But the bridge structures would be elevated. So, let's keep the conversation interactive. So the next steps here, Whitney right now and I are doing the roadshow, we're doing presentations, and you were number 3. So yesterday, we did both the Board of County Commissioners, first in the morning, and then we did Tenino City Council last night. And I'll just say that it was my sense, and John, feel free to chime in, you were there too, but in general, the council appeared very pleased with the findings, and Mayor Fournier expressed a willingness at the next council meeting to have a resolution drafted for the council to approve the study. So they're in a position. The Board of County Commissioners, I think they're very receptive. I think they're looking toward Bucota and Tenino's leadership to work out which would be the priority trail. And really for Thurston County, that segment south of city limits along Crowder Road and south of 184th is all in Thurston County jurisdiction, so they would be the lead. But I think it would really require a partnership of Tenino, Bucota, and the county to proceed on that effort. for the county, let's just talk about that that stretch south to Bucota. There is several funding sources that the communities could pursue. One would be the very source of funding that funded this study. It could be federal transportation alternative program or federal surface transportation block grant funding, which could be used. It can be used for all phases, including preliminary engineering, that design phase, right-of-way, and construction. Other sources of funding would be Washington State Department of Transportation Bicycle and Pedestrian Safety Grant, commonly used for trails. It can be used for design and construction. For Thurston County, they have their real estate excise tax, can be used for capital projects, as well as conservation futures funding and impact fees. So the county might be quiet about it, but they do have funding for capital projects like this. What they don't have is funding to maintain the system. And so I think if they were to come forward as a partner and help provide match for federal grants and funding sources, I think in the end they'd really be looking to Tenino and Bucota for some type of interlocal agreement to work out that maintenance and operations of that trail. So that would probably be a major point of negotiation with the county. For DOT, if you were to pursue, say, GR2B along State Route 507, then you're negotiating with both Thurston County and Department of Transportation. And in general, I'm not saying they're unwilling. DOT is really starting to be much more supportive of active transportation, but considering the environment within that DOT right-of-way with limited shoulder and drainage ditches and just the speed of traffic through there, I think they would probably be more inclined to see the trail on the other side of the tracks, and from just that ambience point of view would probably score better. So the next steps after approval of the study, I think would be for the city to somehow memorialize this study and those alignments, and I could let Dan speak to you probably a little bit how you would do that, like if you'd want to update your comprehensive plan and eventually work it into your transportation improvement program. If you were awarded funding, then you would program that into the state transportation improvement program. But coming up with doing that, getting funding for that design phase, you can really nail down specifically what such a project would cost. Dan, do you have anything else to add to that?
Not really. I mean, I think you have to have it in the local plans in order to have an opportunity to compete for state and local, county funds. So that's really important. I was going to ask you about the federal sources. Are they typically awarding millions of dollars for these types of projects, or is it like
we have in the past
cobbling 250 together here and there and make it work?
It would probably be phased. So when you use funding from Federal Highway Administration, once you obligate that as you enter into a contract with Federal Highways to be able to bill against the project, that starts the clock ticking, and you have 10 years from when you start your project to complete it. And so in 10 years it's plausible that the city and the county could, at least, I'm just talking about the Bucota stretch here as an example, do the design phase, and then in a subsequent call for projects come back and ask for right-of-way and construction. So as an example, our agency just awarded Tumwater $1 million in congestion mitigation air quality improvement program funds to do a portion of the Deschutes Valley Trail from Tumwater Falls Park down through Tumwater Historic Park. So So there has been a precedent set. Much of the bridging the gap of the Chehalis Western Trail, the 3 bridges over I-5, Martin Way, and Pacific Avenue, was funded by federal dollars that TRPC awarded, and many of those came in $1 million increments. So at least you could start by getting the trail down to Crowder Road, like down to 184th. That would sort of be, like, you could say phase 1, and then phase 2 would be trying to figure out, phase 2 is going to be much more difficult just because of your water resource conflicts and needing structures, but probably even more challenging would just be negotiating the right-of-way with the property owner, whether it's a long-term easement or actually acquiring that property outright, fee simple.
So the project is broken into phases that naturally populate the capital improvement program in the parks or the CFP section of the comp plan, right?
Yeah, I think that would be a good way, is to sort of chunk it out like that. TRPC is updating the Thurston Regional Trails Plan this year. I'm leading that effort, and so we'll be incorporating the findings from this. We would be looking to Tenino, we'd be looking to the Planning Commission and Dan and John to say, okay, what do you want to, what alignment do you want to show in the regional trails plan as your preferred alignment? You know, there could be some flexibility for some variation like that GR3, whether it's on the north or south side of 6th Avenue, that's just a minor detail, but you know, that is the city's preferred approach, and that we would call for extending that. Commissioner Edwards from Thurston County did sort of ask, well, where does the trail go once you reach West Tenino city limits? Does it just end right there? So it would be worth evaluating in the longer term whether there's an opportunity to expand that trail even further west, say to Grand Mound, because the county has funding to do a study for a trail corridor from Grand Mound to Rochester. So we've kind of had this potential gap. How do we fill that gap? For Tenino, the West Tenino segment, funding options are kind of the same on the federal funding, surface transportation, block grants, transportation alternative program funds, the WashDOT, bicycle pedestrian safety grant. As development occurs, you could require some developer-funded frontage improvements, and the trail could be part of that. I don't know if Tenino sort of has that incorporated through impact fees or a SEPA process. I'm not quite sure how Tenino approaches that, but that could be an option.
And no impact fees, but developer improvements are typically parts of the larger developments.
So we're gonna present to Bucota in August. They'll more or less receive the same presentation you did tonight. Probably won't focus too much on the West Tenino extension. We'll probably focus more on the Bucota extension. But yeah, that's it. Any questions?
Did you have anything about passing under the train trestle on the way out? That would be the West Tenino portion of the trail. Was there any special considerations for that portion?
You know, we had Sargent Engineers, which is a structural engineer company, they gave us cost estimate for the bridges, and also looked at it to say, yeah, there can be space in between. So there would have to be a little bit of construction happen to it, but it is feasible. And we really kind of looked at, I don't know if you're familiar with Rainier Road, where the Chehalis Western Trail kind of leaves the actual trail and goes onto the road. You know, okay. Well, there's a portion of the bridge that would be very similar, that it just kind of goes right next to the road, but it would be protected.
And another example would be Rainier Road going into Rainier, which becomes Minnesota Street. If you'll notice there under that train trestle, the city got funding to actually dig further back and create a retaining wall and fit in a little sidewalk path. add there if necessary.
Great. And then, you mentioned potentially getting feedback from us on some of this, our preferences for the regional thirst and trails plan. What's the timeline on that?
So we're just kicking that process off. It's gonna be a 2-year process. We're gonna have a yet to be formed advisory work group that would provide feedback. But also TRPC has a standing technical advisory committee. John gets the agendas for those meetings, and we would be working through our technical advisory committee and reaching out to community staff to get their input. The exact timeline for when we would do that, I don't know, but that opportunity would certainly be made. And something I didn't mention with this study, it was really just an exploratory technical feasibility study, so we didn't budget for any community engagement or public participation because we didn't want to just go out to the community and say, hey, what do you think about putting a trail here? What we really wanted to do is just say, just understand, is this feasible, is this cost effective? Once the Tenino would decide to go out and proceed to get funding for a trail, I think during that design phase you would want to have a fairly robust community engagement process to get community input on the alignment of that trail, what the design would look like, what you might want to name it, benches, lighting, all that kind of stuff. Because that's the kind of stuff people want to talk about, and we just didn't want to go down that path with this study.
John, any questions, observations you want to share?
No, I got it. I'm real curious. I was going to ask, but you already answered the question. You're going to do it through the TAC. It's a 2-year process, so I'm looking forward to that. And some of what you're talking about, and one of the reasons we asked you to present to the Planning Commission is, and the reason why we want, where does the West Tenino Trail go? Through our eyes, it goes to the ag park. Having said that, now that State Department of Fish and Wildlife is looking to buy the property across the street, it's becoming more, because now it's a big recreation area. So you get the YT trail going out there, and it ties into this new, wilderness trail network that Washington Fish and Wildlife envisions. I think it's got possibilities.
Yeah, and we kind of address the pros and cons of, well, we don't kind of, we do address the pros and cons in the study, because originally, that's why we did have it on the north, because we had heard about that, and then we realized how soon the ag park was gonna be developed, so we try to remove ourselves and just say, driveway crossings, cut and fill, and the costs end up being very similar. So it's very, in the study it says, here's some pros for the north, here's some cons for the north, here's some pros, here's some cons.
No, and we talked about that, and we also, the prospect of, whether it's WashDOT, whatever agency is going to put the roundabout at the intersection of Old 99 and 507. That's, I drool every time I start thinking about that, because that's ideal to, east and west across 507, and if we wanted to, although that's problematic, you could go across Old 99 there. The problem with that is that's about where the hill mass comes down to the hillside, But at some point, we do want to throw it across Old 99 to the north to access this new recreational park.
I know how you fix that on a map, you just draw a really thick line.
Yeah.
It covers both the north and south alignment.
Once you decide what side is best on to the design process, as development occurs out there, you can factor in where you might want to put in some type of crossing devices, whether they're rapid rectangular flashing beacons with marked crosswalks, with landing pads and sidewalks on the other side, so that people can feel safe crossing
old Highway 99.
And as the city grows to the west, it's likely that you'll start to see a signal or something else along the way, depending on how dense it gets, and so there's other options for crossings.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what happens to the traffic patterns when Hidden Meadows develops. And it's gonna go quick now. They're marking the highway to open the trench to get utilities to that property. And we're excited about that too, because we're gonna leverage that to extend the utilities to the Ag Park property. But it's, to me, it's now a matter of timing. You know, I don't know if the stars are gonna align for us and allow us to execute while all of these moving pieces are in play, but the possibilities there, and we're gonna, push it for all it's worth.
Well, thank you.
Great, thank you.
And we'll, I guess through Dan, we'll get you a copy of the draft proposal.
Great.
Thank you.
So then, should we move on to lot split discussion?
Whatever you want to do.
Will need to be a part of that, won't we? Okay. Well, let's see if we can get him. Phone a friend time. Hello. I'm about to put you there. Yeah, hang on. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. Okay, so we are. I don't know, do you think we should go ahead and conduct approval of agenda and meeting minutes before we proceed to the lot split?
Yes. Is Aaron there? It's just you and Aaron? Is that
Yeah,
right?
that's right. So you'll be the completion of our quorum here.
Okay. Yes, let's go through all the voting stuff.
Great. So have you reviewed the agenda?
Yes.
Okay, good. Any motions to approve it?
I move to approve the agenda as presented.
We have a
Well, second.
Great. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye, agenda is approved. Have you the minutes from the May 8th, 2019?
I don't know that did we get them? I don't know if I got them. Yes, I have them.
Oh, you do? Great.
Perfect.
Well, I'll move to approve the minutes as presented from the May 8th, 2019 meeting.
Great, we have a motion. Great. All those approved?
Aye.
Great, meeting minutes from May 8th, 2019 are approved. No changes. So, do we have a mayor's report?
We do.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Chair Rutherford, good evening. So, I'm briefing you now to pick up from the 9th of May until today. Between the Planning Commission and the City Council, there were several cancellations, so I'm going to give you 3 months worth here. So the City Council has been, we've been sinking a lot of money into the park. We've been doing a lot of economic development. And this coming year, as we enter the 2020 budget development process, the focus is going to switch to transportation infrastructure. And City Council has already got together and given us the direction to develop some revenue options. They're looking at, there's a delta between what cities may legally collect in sales taxes from businesses in the local area and what we actually collect. And so some of that delta may be a little piece of road revenue raising in there. There may also be some low-cost housing revenue raisings in there. We're looking at that. And you know, whatever options are out there, the council's asked them to develop those for us, bring them forward, and they want to evaluate whether or not we want to do that in 2020. Dan was kind enough to come down this week and meet with folks from the city and folks from Water and Wastewater Services. You all have been briefed on our septage receiving plan. Mr. Nguyen from Water and Wastewater Services finally presented his plan to do septage receiving to the city council to include a $1.4 million budget, and they approved that. So this meeting I'm telling you about, we all came down here, and really it was like, okay, we know what the plan is, we know what our budget is, what do we want to do first, and what do we want to do second, and what do we want to do third. And we made progress doing that, but it's still a plan in progress. We have to do a little work to remove some of the contents in the holding ponds currently, and once that sludge has been removed and we have some working space, we're going to start our septage receiving operation. Our plan is to use current city funds to get it started, and then once we do the septage receiving and start that revenue flow, we will siphon off some of that revenue to create the rest of the infrastructure to complete our septage receiving operation. It's too bad Mr. Brewster left. He briefed the Thurston Climate Mitigation Plan. I was not here for that, so I can't give you the details, but it's hanging on our website if you want to see it. The city now owns a caboose. There was a shopping development up in Renton, and that shopping center was sold to turn into housing, and one of the things they had to get rid of was a caboose. We got it. It's going to take a little bit to restore it, but the plan is make it safe, put it on that piece of train track that's sitting out in front of the museum, and turn it over to the museum. They'll take care of the restoration of it, and once it's ready, we plan on turning it into a bed and breakfast or something like that will become a revenue stream for the city. Over the last several months, 4 different Eagle Scouts have asked to do projects in the park. 3 of them involves stairs on some of the undeveloped trails in there. A couple of them want to put railings around those trails, and one guy wants to put 40 feet of fencing up. And the most interesting project is another Eagle Scout wants to publish the trail map of all the, not the city's trails, but the unimproved trails up there, and then put little dispenser boxes out there and keep them full so that people can have a copy of the trail map as they're out there walking the trails. I thought that was pretty clever. This last meeting, not yesterday's meeting before last, Mr. Keith Flowelling, who is the executive director of TCOM 911, came and gave a presentation to the council. The import to you all is that, as planners, the council is looking, TCOM 911 is looking to improve Thurston County's communication system. Current system is analog, everything else out there is digital. The 2 systems can't mesh. It puts us at a decided disadvantage. So they want to get rid of all their analog equipment, employ new digital equipment. For example, the recent, about a year ago, the train derailment in Nisqually, even though it happened physically in Thurston County was the last to respond to it because they couldn't hear the traffic. Pierce County and not Fort Lewis, but JBLM first responders did the bulk of that. The city was donated the piece of land to the west of the library building, the parking lot, was actually on a parcel of land that used to be owned by Key Bank. When Key Bank sold the building next door to OB Credit Union, they did not realize that they had two parcels that were involved. So as they tried to complete the real estate transaction, what they realized is, hey, we got this little parcel hanging out here. OB said, we don't want it. We said, heck yeah, thank you very much. So that was worth about 70 grand. This building, the legislature did a $500,000 direct appropriation to us. That's free money to us. Department of Commerce is the faucet through which that money flows. Department of Commerce has contacted us, and we've begun the process of putting the agreements in place to get that money faucet turned on. And as soon as it turns on, our city engineer is got an architect already lined up to come in here, do the detailed assessments of what we really need, and then we'll balance that against how much money we can spend and figure out where we're going to get the most bang for those bucks. And then once that's done, Gibson Olson will then design design what it's going to look like, and then they will do the bid process on our behalf so that we don't have to manage that. Gibson Olson will manage the construction contract. They'll let it, somebody will come in, they'll do the construction. Gibson Olson will do all the receivership of it, and when Mike Marshall's happy, he'll come to us and say, what do you think? We'll say, yeah, we love it, thank you very much, and we'll have a renovated city hall. We hope that process starts within the next 8 weeks, and if everything goes according to plan, then the rehab on this should be done by summer of 2020. The $600,000 to extend the sewer and water, extend the water from the junction of wherever the T is going to be for Hidden Meadows to the extreme west edge of our wastewater treatment plant property, and then sewer from the plant to the west edge of the property. Another direct appropriation for $600,000. We've started the same process on that. So as soon as they turn that faucet on, again, Gibson Olson's ready to execute. The EDC asked for and received $1.4 million for the first building to go onto the ag park. Great. We don't have any money to do the site development and pour a foundation and all that kind of stuff. So we gotta figure out how to overcome that gap, and once we got that gap overcome, then the first building's gonna go. Again, we'd like that to be done, sooner is better than later, but summer of 2020. The Quarry House, we know that we were approved for a $361,000 CDBG grant. That's a little different process. That's channeled through Thurston County. And as soon as Thurston County tells us they're ready, then we're ready, and it'll be the same thing. We'll have our city engineer do a scope of work, and they'll do the design build process for us. We had a discussion last night. Some of you may have heard us talking about that a little bit over here when you walked in. The EDC is ready to had the discussion with our city council last night about the governance structure for the ag park. What's that? When that first building is built and ready for tenants to move in, somebody got to be the guy on the ground with the keys to open the doors and all that kind of stuff. Who's going to get the leases? Who's going to bring new business in? So that's what we're talking about, and that's the EDC is pulling together. They're calling it a green ribbon panel. 32 folks that have signed on to the project have agreed to help them figure out the best governance system to implement. They'll make that recommendation to somebody. That's one of the things that we got to figure out. We know the EDC is going to be part of the decision-making process, and we know the city is going to be part of the decision-making process. if I was the Port of Olympia that had put $75,000 into it, I'd wanna be part of that process too. But they're not right now. So, that's gotta be figured out. The other thing we did last night is we're this close to submitting our certification packet for the Creative District. So last night, the council passed a resolution amending our original Creative District resolution. And the reason for that amendment is we've updated the Creative District map, so the Creative District's now a little bit bigger. The second thing we did with that resolution is we adopted an initial budget, because when we get the certification, it will come with a $5,000 check. And the reason I'm explaining this to you is the first thing we want to do with that $5,000 is hire Mr. George Sharp from the EDC to integrate the Creative District stuff into our comprehensive plan. And it goes right along with the YTT study findings. So, you know, eventually what you guys are gonna have on your table is these little piles of things, all of which belong in the comprehensive plan, and you guys are gonna have to sort out what the priorities are and all that kind of stuff. But we wanna develop that out for you guys, you know, to make that process as easy as possible for you. And then last but not least, you know, we have the facade improvement grant program that we have. You can't believe how hard it is to get people to ask for free money, but it's very difficult. And here we are in July, we have 2 more months before we cut it off, and we've only had 2 requests, one from the post office, one from the farmer's market. The post office is easy, you can see what they've done. They have more than met the match requirement. And what they asked for was a table for people to sit at. We just happen to have a couple. You've seen them over at the Quarry House. We bought too many. Okay, here's a table. And the other thing is the new signs. So within the parameters of the grant, by giving them the table out of assets we already have, we can now use the rest of their grant to buy the sign that they want. So they're gonna get what they asked for. And then the Tenino Farmers Market, as an organization, they wanna put 2 more benches along the west side of Olympia Street. And that grant was approved. It's more than the authorized amount, but council is going to consider allowing that to occur at the next meeting. So again, you know, it's all these moving pieces we've got into place. They're starting to mesh together, and they're starting to come together in a comprehensive whole. So, pending your questions, that's the mayor's report.
No questions? Great. Thank you. Great, so, no public hearings. Let's move on to the lot split discussion. Dan, do you?
Yeah, I'm ready to go. Do you have the copy of the staff report in front of you?
I do.
I'm not sure if Will has it or not, but it's pretty short, so I'm probably gonna read most of it if that's okay with you. Recently, a property owner approached the city and asked for restitution or recreation of a process that they thought had existed, and so the city went through that process. Look at that. They went through that process and changed some ordinances to allow for the this process to kind of proceed. And so Brian Hedden, the owner of the property at 773 Central Avenue, is requesting a lot split to a previously combined parcel at the southwest corner of Central Street and Hayden Street, and requesting that the lot boundaries be restored according to the previously defined legal description. Now, the way that works is if a previous property owner went through the process to combine a parcel, and most of the time these parcels have a legal description that says something like Lot 1 and Lot 2 of, Lucky Charms Division 4 or whatever. If they go to combine that and then they never actually place anything over the top of those parcels, like a shed or dig a ditch and build a pool or something like that, then this allowance in the Tenino code allows you to split that back out into 2 legal lots of record. In my experience, the assessor's office is pretty fluid with their allowance on letting property owners combine and seg properties, and so this is kind of a recognition of that. So staff recommends approval of the lot split request based upon the finding that the request meets the requirements of TMC Chapter 114.100.040. It's a pretty straightforward request. I think you've seen what those look like before. I included some background there from my research of the county records on the boundary line adjustment that was done in 2014, and the confirmation in writing from the owner in June that there had been no substantive changes to the use of the property and no modification of the environment on the lot since it was combined. The owner confirms that the split would not result in any violation of any land use provision in the municipal code, and if approved at tonight's meeting, a lot split form is going to be completed and submitted to the city for processing through the county auditor. So this is a procedural piece here, and the property owner still has to go through a process with the county auditor to actually seg that, split that lot back out into 2 legal lots of record with their own unique parcel numbers. So that concludes staff's recommendation on the lot split for 773 Central Avenue East. So do you have any questions or clarifications of staff?
So they're just splitting it in half in the natural way that it otherwise would be?
It's back to the previous split, right? So, and that lot, it's a vacant lot. It's on the corner of Central and Hayden, and I think those parcel lines run north-south, and would have otherwise fronted on Central.
Any question? You
Can't think of any.
may as well keep gabbling.
I was gonna say, should we pass the gavel?
No, you should.
Okay. Well, do we have a motion?
Alright. I will move to approve the 773 Central Avenue East lot split application as presented by staff, finding that the request meets the requirements of Tenino Municipal Code 114.100.040.
I'll second.
All those approved?
Aye.
Motion passes. Great. So that concludes our unfinished business. I realize this has been a unusual meeting. I skipped the public comment. Do we have public comment?
If I may, I don't have a public comment. This is Mr. Alex Murray. He has, so I came into work one day, I don't remember which day it was, and here's this email with a commission application in it, and I'm like, okay. And I'm reading it. He's a builder, he's a realtor, he has all kinds of experience in this area, and I'm thinking, great, he wants to be on the Planning Commission. So I called him to confirm. He said, no, actually I'm interested in the Civil Service Commission. So you guys gotta sell him.
Well, that turns things around.
He's here to be sold.
Great. Well, welcome. You can see, we conduct a lot of important business on behalf of the city, and sometimes have trouble having enough people to conduct that business, and it's important, and the city needs these things to move forward in a timely manner. So, selfishly, We're hoping for somebody else to come aboard just so that we can maintain a quorum and conduct the business. Advantages to you, I guess, would be plugging into what's really going on in the city and being a part of those decisions that are going to impact the future of the city for decades to come, and it's fulfilling in that way.
Let's see. I say. It's a great opportunity. Being on the Planning Commission is a great opportunity to learn a lot of things that you probably know a little bit about, but maybe don't know all of the nuts and bolts of how it goes into play in a municipal government kind of situation. And so, I found my role on the commission useful in lots of aspects of my life beyond just being here. Not sure what you're looking for, what kind of time commitment you're into. We meet once a month. It's not too much time to ask. What? Familiar with historical buildings? Right? Nice. Well, we do have this historical overlay zone, and how are we still working on that? The other thing?
Creative district?
No, the other one. The historical district. Kind of fallen off of the.
Has it fallen off? I think it's just, it hasn't fallen off. It's certainly dropped out of the top 10 priorities. Why? Because there's not as much money associated with the historic district as there is a creative district.
Right. We're working on starting our own local historical registry in town that would let the city be have access to other pools of money, potentially by setting it. But we're really in the early phases of getting that program set up, and Planning Commission is part of that. So if you were interested in that, that could be of a big help to us.
Well, here's what we did. It's a little bit of sleight of hand. So in 2018, we published the resolution, yay, verily, we're going to have a creative district. George Sharp at the EDC picked up on that and made it his mission to try to get us certified, because as we started down that path because intuitively reading the materials on creative districts made sense to us. It fits with the other things we're doing. And so we passed the resolution and we started going to more events, and every time we would go to an event, we would get more validation about the path we decided to go on being the correct one. So that's where the priorities shifted. We did the resolution, we go to certification, and now as part of the certification packet, the resolution isn't good enough. As part of the certification packet, we need a stronger statement. The city needs to make a stronger statement of commitment to the process, right? Call it an ordinance. So by ordinance now, we are establishing what we are going to call the Arts, Recreation, Culture, and History Commission. So we're going to wrap it all together, bring it under the umbrella of the executive. It will be an advisory commission to both the executive and the council. For administrative purposes, we're putting it under the executive because I can fund that easier. But the recommendations they make will bubble their way up to the council, so it has to be decided that way. And then for budgeting purposes, we're going to consider them part of planning and economic development. So, so they're in the same monetary pool as everything that you all do. So you can see again, we're trying to mesh these processes and try to leverage, wherever we can make one body wear more than one hat. That's what we're going to try to do. So that's working its way up. Shut your ears. In less than 4 years, we have managed to bring almost $10 million into the city. And the stuff we're
you know, and start the show, right? When somebody stands up there and tells me they don't give a crap about what Tenino wants to do with the trail out, guess what I'm gonna do? We're gonna get the trail going, it's gonna go out there. And if the county doesn't wanna play, the county don't have to play. We don't have to play either. We've got a great relationship with the county. The combined maintenance, that, you know, they build it, we maintain it, that's a really good model for us. And we see that getting, you know, that'll get us around the park and down to 184th. And if the county really wants to do the EV thing and all that out to Bucota, you know, great on it. You know, we're in support of Bucota, right? But our primary interest is west. You can make the numbers support anything you want. I know how decision matrices work. It doesn't take an engineer to go stand out there and see where the damn thing's gonna go. To me, that study, all that study is to me is, it's gonna cost us 2.3 million. Plus we gotta buy a bridge. They didn't wanna put any effort into that bridge because it doesn't suit their purposes. Guess where I'm putting my effort? So, that's the kind of organization we are.
I'll add some what I see as some positives. So I've been working with the Planning Commission for about 6 months now, and like many small towns, I think the momentum goes to the people who show up, you know, and the people at this table who are committed to comprehensive planning and natural resource preservation and affordable housing and economic development and parks. They do make a difference, and there's support for planning commissions throughout the state. And there's a short course coming up on September 19th in Winlock that I would highly encourage you to go. We could make an evening of it if you wanted to. And so that's on Thursday, September 19th at the Olyqua Senior Center on Karen Street in Winlock. These are regular meetings that are held around the state. Will, you've been to one before, right? Corey, you've been to a couple. They're similar. There's usually a little bit of a difference, but they cover things like comprehensive planning basics, Washington's legal framework for land use planning, roles and responsibilities in planning and public participation and effective meetings. They do this thing called Open Public Meetings Act, which is a state law about how you conduct meetings, and you know that the three of them can't go to the bar after this meeting and go chat about planning commission stuff, because that would be a violation, because that's a continuation of this meeting without the public's involvement. So stuff like that. Really good, really important, and again, planning commissions make a difference around the state, and you have an opportunity to see and influence your community. So it's just about the best way I think you can get involved in your community, and in a setting like this where it's once a month, it's really not that big of a lift either, at least from my perspective. So that's a couple little items.
Do you have any questions for us with that?
So I guess the one thing that was on my mind was just time commitment. So other than the one meeting a month, how much time do you dedicate to this committee?
I mean,
There is I don't know, occasional homework. It's pretty limited though, at least in the couple of years I've been here. I know I was not here for the development of the current comprehensive plan. I don't know if there was more to it during that time. But sometimes, you know, something comes up about a particular piece of the municipal code or something that we need to revisit back at home, and so that we know when we come to the next meeting the parameters of the discussion, and we know what's on the books and what the discussion is about as far as potentially changing it. And then I mean it's pretty minimal though, really, overall.
and then I guess so, because we've lived now in town here for 3 years. And just in those 3 years, I mean, we've absolutely loved what we've seen as far as all the signage, the park, just everything that's been going on in town. So that, I mean, we're talking about big projects such as bike paths and stuff, but then also smaller projects, signage. I know I haven't been over there to see it yet, but I've been following the bike, the
Kiosk, yeah.
bike kiosk over out there. So those are the types of things that the planning committee is addressing and doing as well.
Some of those things, some of them are just done through like the mayor's office, the administration does
Okay.
some of those things, but when the council votes to approve on it, we get involved in the discussion in some of the things, I would say, not everything. It just depends on what path it's flowing through the decision-making process, I guess. We talk a lot about, like the future. So some of the most interesting things for me, what direction do we want to take the town, and where do we want to see things in 10 or 20 years? You know, we're planning out to that amount of time. Where if the city was going to grow, which direction would we grow? Where do we want to, pick up some, annex some areas potentially in the future? What makes the most sense? All those sort of moving pieces, like how do we want to zone different areas of the community? What do we want it to look like? Sort of those like higher level kind of